The last sound I remember before everything fell apart was the crisp scratch of my pen signing a check for $50,000. It wasn't a sound of celebration, it was the sound of a final exhale after a lifetime of holding my breath. This check wasn't just a wedding gift for my younger brother, Mark. It was the down payment on his new life, the closing chapter on my 2 decades of being his silent benefactor, his quiet safety net. I truly believed I was purchasing his happiness and, in turn, my own freedom. I had no idea that what I was actually funding was the most profound humiliation of my life, served cold in front of everyone I knew, at the very party I paid for. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you'd consider subscribing to my channel. It would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Emily. And the last sound I remember before my world fractured was the crisp, definitive scratch of my pen signing a check for $50,000. It wasn't a sound of joyous celebration. It was the sound of a long, slow exhale after a lifetime of holding my breath. This check wasn't just a wedding gift for my younger brother, Mark. It was the down payment on his new life, the final installment on my 2 decades of service as his silent benefactor, his quiet, ever-present safety net. I sat there in the leather chair of my home office, the scent of old books and fresh coffee in the air, a framed photo of a much younger Mark and me on the corner of my desk, and I truly believed I was purchasing his happiness and, in turn, my own long overdue freedom. I had no idea that what I was actually funding was the most profound and public humiliation of my life, an ambush served cold in front of everyone I knew, at the very party I had paid for. The week before the wedding, Mark had called me, his voice brimming with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Em, I can't believe it's all coming together," he'd said. "The venue, the house, none of it would be possible without you. You've always been my rock." I remember feeling a warm glow spread through my chest. The sacrifices, the canceled vacations, the investment opportunities I'd passed on to keep his dreams afloat, it all felt worth it in that moment. I thought back to 5 years prior, when I had to sell a block of stocks I'd earmarked for my own early retirement, just to cover the debts from his disastrous tech startup. "Of course, Mark," I'd replied, pushing that memory down. "I just want you to be happy." Looking back, I can see the subtle manipulation in his words, the careful reinforcement of my role as the provider, the rock that must never crumble. The ballroom was breathtaking, exactly as the planners had promised. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables draped in silk, and the scent of roses and gardenias, a custom blend I had personally approved, hung heavy and sweet in the air. I saw Mark across the room, his arm around his new bride, Jessica. He looked happier than I had ever seen him, and a strange, hollow sort of pride settled in my chest. This was the culmination of my life's secret work. Every time I had quietly absorbed the debt from one of his failed startups, every late-night call I made to a worried investor to smooth things over, every time I liquidated a piece of my own portfolio to fund his next big idea, it had all led to this, a perfect, glittering moment that I had built for him. I started to walk over, a genuine smile on my face, ready to congratulate them again. But as I drew closer, I saw a subtle shift in Jessica's expression. Her smile tightened, becoming something brittle and decorative. She leaned in and whispered something in Mark's ear. And he, my brother, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged and whose college tuition I had paid, just nodded. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when Jessica detached herself from him and glided towards me, her expensive gown whispering against the polished floor. Her smile was fixed, but her eyes were cold as ice. She took my hand, and her grip was surprisingly strong, her manicured nails digging slightly into my skin. She leaned in, and the cloying scent of her perfume filled my senses. "Emily," she murmured, her voice a low, chilling whisper that was meant for my ears alone. "I need you to understand something. The people here, my friends, my family, They see me as I am now, not as the girl from the trailer park you once knew. A cold shock, sharp and painful, shot through my entire body. I had never, not once, spoken of her past, a past she had tearfully confided in me years ago over a bottle of wine, a story I had held in confidence as a sacred trust. My confusion must have been written all over my face, because her eyes hardened. She tightened her grip on my arm and began to pull me, not aggressively, but with an undeniable force, towards a side door tucked away behind a curtain, away from the music and the laughter. Mark is starting a new life now, a better one, she continued, her voice dropping even lower, laced with a venom that made me flinch. And your presence here, with all your quiet judgment and your history, is a stain on it. We've received your generous gift. Your part in this is done. Please, just leave before you make a scene. My mind reeled, trying to process the sheer cruelty of her words. I looked past her, desperately searching for my brother's face in the crowd. I found him. He was watching us. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. And in that moment, I saw a flicker of something, shame, maybe, or weakness. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a tiny gesture that screamed, "Don't fight this, just go." And then he deliberately turned his back on me, turning back to his new wife's friends, leaving me alone in the shadows with her. That silent, final cut severed more than 2 decades of my devotion. It was the cleanest, most brutal execution I had ever witnessed. The drive home was a blur of streetlights streaking across my windshield like tears. I don't remember the traffic or the route I took. I just remember the profound, echoing silence in my car. A silence that was louder than the screaming in my head. As I walked out, a final stinging memory surfaced: the delicate pearl necklace, our mother's heirloom, that I had given Jessica as a wedding gift. She hadn't been wearing it, instead. I'd seen it clasped around the neck of her maid of honor, as if it were a mere costume prop. By the time I walked through my own front door and was enveloped by the familiar quiet of my own home, the deep, gut-wrenching hurt had begun to change. It was crystallizing, the raw emotion hardening into a cold, hard clarity. The shock was wearing off, and something else, something much more dangerous, was taking its place: reason. My phone buzzed on the hall table. It was a text from Mark. For a wild, hopeful moment, I thought it might be an apology, a frantic explanation. It wasn't. The message read, "You made Jessica cry on her wedding day. You always have to be the center of attention, don't you?" The gaslighting was so blatant, so utterly shameless. It was almost laughable. He wasn't just siding with her. He was actively rewriting reality to make me the villain. In that instant, I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't dealing with a family misunderstanding anymore. This was a hostile takeover, and I had been deemed a liability to the new corporation. I didn't delete the message. Instead, with a calmness that surprised even me, I took a screenshot and saved it to a new secure folder on my phone. I labeled it Evidence A, the businesswoman in me, the part of my mind that I had suppressed for so long in my dealings with my family, was now fully awake. The next morning, I didn't waste time crying or calling friends for sympathy. I called my financial advisor, David, a sharp, no-nonsense man who had witnessed my financial sacrifices for Mark for years, always with a look of professional concern. "David," I said, my voice even and steady, "I need to recall a pending wire transfer." I laid out the situation for him, not with emotion or family drama, but with the cold, hard facts of a business deal gone wrong. "This wasn't a gift," I explained. "It was an investment in a partnership. That partnership has been dissolved, effective immediately." He didn't ask questions. He let out a slow breath. "Emily, I've been waiting for this call for 5 years. I'm glad you're finally choosing yourself. I'll get the paperwork ready." His validation was a small, firm anchor in my swirling sea of betrayal. The $50,000 check for the house wasn't some magical gift sent into the ether. It was a scheduled transaction, an escrow account with my name listed as the sole benefactor. a transaction I still had complete control over. The final piece of confirmation I needed came not from digging, but from Mark's own carelessness. 2 days after the wedding, I received an email from him with the subject line, "Caterer's final invoice." He was asking if I had the contact info for the caterer to settle a minor charge, but in his haste, he had forwarded the entire email chain. Below his message was his previous exchange with Jessica. The subject line was, "Our 5-year plan." In it, they discussed the house, a new car, and a trip to Europe, all contingent on my final big contribution after the wedding. One line from Jessica burned itself into my memory. "We just have to manage Emily carefully until everything is finalized. Then we can start setting boundaries." It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a premeditated extraction. I saved the entire email as a PDF. Finally, I drafted a single, concise email to my bank's transfer department. It was polite, professional, and utterly final. As I hit send, I didn't feel the heat of revenge. I felt the cool, satisfying click of a ledger finally being balanced. The call I was expecting didn't come during the honeymoon. It came on a Tuesday afternoon. A perfectly ordinary day. I was in my office reviewing quarterly reports. When my phone rang, the caller ID wasn't Mark's name. It was Oakwood Real Estate. I took a deep breath and answered, my voice perfectly calm. "This is Emily." A flustered, confused man was on the other end. "Ma'am, we're here for the closing on the property for Mark and Jessica. And there seems to be an issue with the funding from your end. The transfer for the down payment was recalled." I let a beat of silence hang in the air before I replied, my voice cool and professional. "That is correct. The issue is intentional." I didn't need to say anything else. I heard a choked sound on the other end before I politely ended the call. The countdown had begun. 10 seconds later, my phone erupted with Mark's number. I let it ring twice before answering. He wasn't yelling about flowers or caterers or a ruined party. This was a different kind of scream. It was the raw, primal panic of a man watching his entire future, the one he hadn't earned, disintegrate before his very eyes. "Emily, what the hell did you do?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "The bank said the funds were recalled. They're going to give the house to the next buyer. This was our dream house." I held the phone slightly away from my ear, letting his panic wash over me without touching me. When he finally paused to take a breath, I spoke, my voice even and steady, devoid of any anger or pain. I simply respected Jessica's wishes. "Mark, she made it very clear that she wanted me out of your new life. So, I removed my financial contribution from it. It seemed like the only logical thing to do." But that's not what she meant," he stammered, the desperation clear in his voice. I could hear Jessica sobbing hysterically in the background. Not the delicate, manipulative tears from the wedding, but the devastating, ugly sobs of true loss. "You can't have it both ways, Mark," I said, my voice dropping into a final, quiet register. "You can't stand on the foundation that I built for you and then kick me out of the house. That foundation is now gone." He was speechless, making small choked sounds. But that was our future," he finally whispered, his voice broken. "That was everything." I paused for a moment before delivering the final line. "Yes, it was," I said softly, "and you gave it all away for a party." Then I hung up. In the weeks that followed, my phone was a storm of angry voicemails from distant relatives. The worst was from Aunt Carol. "How could you be so selfish? Emily," she shrieked into my voicemail, "to ruin your brother's big day over a little misunderstanding. Your mother would be so ashamed of you." The mention of my mother was a low blow, but it had lost its power. I simply deleted the message. Not a single cousin or aunt who had witnessed the event called to offer support. Their silence was its own kind of verdict, a testament to a family system that prized avoiding conflict over doing what was right. Then, one evening, a message popped up on my social media from a distant cousin. Sarah, who I barely knew. "Hi, Emily," it read. "I was at the wedding. I saw what Jessica did. And I saw her maid of honor wearing your mother's necklace. It was disgusting. I just wanted to say, "You did the right thing." That small message from an unexpected ally was a lifeline. It was proof that I wasn't crazy, that what I experienced was real and wrong. Their public humiliation was not my creation. It was the direct and unavoidable consequence of their own greed and cruelty. I heard through the grapevine that Mark had boasted about the house at his job, and the fallout from losing it had been professionally embarrassing. The story of their dream house vanishing into thin air became a cautionary tale. A few weeks later, my receptionist buzzed me. "Emily, your brother is in the lobby. He doesn't have an appointment." I told her to send him up. Mark walked into my office looking haggard. He tried to appeal to my emotions, bringing up our childhood. Please," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Are you really going to throw our whole family away over one mistake?" I stood up, my expression unreadable. "You threw it away, Mark, when you stood by and watched your wife humiliate the sister who raised you. Security will see you out." He left without another word. One night, overwhelmed by a fresh wave of grief, I sat down and wrote a long, scathing letter to Mark. I poured out 20 years of frustration, every sacrifice, every quiet disappointment, and when I was done, my hands were shaking, but instead of putting it in an envelope, I took it to my fireplace, struck a match, and watched the pages curl into black ash. I didn't need him to hear my pain to validate it. I just needed to let it go. My peace was profound. It wasn't the bitter, fleeting satisfaction of revenge, but the quiet, expansive freedom of a debt finally, truly, paid in full. I started calling old friends, people I had neglected because I was always too busy putting out Mark's fires. We met for coffee, for dinner. They reminded me of the woman I was before I became Mark's rock. Several months later, I was driving back from a client meeting in a neighboring town. On a whim, I took a different route, a scenic detour through a quiet, tree-lined suburb. And there it was, the house, their dream house. There was a sold sign on the lawn, and a young family was unloading boxes from a moving truck. A little girl with pigtails was laughing as she chased a golden retriever on the fresh green grass. I pulled over to the side of the road and just watched for a moment. I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no regret, just a profound sense of peace. The house had found its rightful owners. 2 months later, I sat across from David, my financial advisor. We weren't discussing bailouts or emergency loans. We were discussing my future. "That $50,000, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "Let's put half of it somewhere it can grow, and the other half, I'm booking a 3-week trip to Italy to take that cooking class I've talked about for a decade." We redirected the entire amount, a portion into a long-term, blue-chip investment portfolio under my name, and the rest into a travel fund. It was the first time in my adult life that I had made a significant financial decision that was entirely and unapologetically for myself. As I signed the new paperwork, I realized that my self-worth was not something to be validated by family approval, but a tangible asset to be cultivated, protected, and invested in. They hadn't just lost a benefactor. They had lost the safety net they never even knew they had. And I had finally, truly graduated. When I got home that evening, I walked over to my desk and picked up the framed photo of a young Mark and me. For the first time, I didn't feel a pang of responsibility or sadness. I just saw a memory. I opened my desk drawer, placed the photo gently inside, and closed it. It was time for new pictures.